Our first tipping point tonight, the mainstream media refuses to talk about the IT aide to House Democrats who was just arrested trying to flee to Pakistan, even though this scandal contains all the elements Democrats pretend the Russia-Trump story contains. It makes you wonder, what else is the mainstream media hiding from us? The funniest part of this cover-up is this criminal investigation into Wasserman Schultz's IT aide. It contains all the elements Democrats claim exist in the Trump-Russia narrative: collusion, family members, corruption, possible blackmail, access to email accounts, abuse of taxpayer money, fleeing the country, passwords exposed, emails hacked, cover-ups, threats to Capitol Hill police, obstruction of justice. Sound familiar? Of course, that's what the Democrats claim about the Trump-Russia story. But we have no evidence that any of those accusations hold water against Trump. Yet this scandal, the Democratic Party in Congress employing a probable criminal, it contains all those elements, yet the mainstream media doesn't seem to care. Joining me now, conservative strategist Inez Feltscher. Inez, good to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
Inez, this is quite something that the mainstream media just seems disinterested. They're brushing this under the rug. They don't care enough to cover this story, to let the American people know. Makes you kind of wonder, and this is our question of the day, what else is the mainstream media hiding from us?
Well, definitely, right? Because there's been nonstop coverage of the Trump-Russia narrative. And I don't want to downplay that as unimportant, but it's interesting that this actually is connected to that exact same narrative and yet is receiving almost no coverage at all.
No, and the funny thing to me, like I said, is it has all the elements the Democrats are claiming, and I agree with you. If any of those elements were substantiated when it comes to Trump and Russia, I'd be the first one to acknowledge that, but so far, no proof, so that makes it, at this point, just a narrative. We have a list, Inez, of about 19. I don't think we'll get through all 19, but Democratic scandals that if this were reversed, if these were scandals that Republicans were involved in, the mainstream media would be going wild, but because it's Democrats, they're silent. The first one I want to cover, besides the IT aide, is two Democratic mayors in the state of Pennsylvania. They were recently charged in the month of July with pay-to-play schemes.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the mayors of Allentown and Reading, Pennsylvania, and along with 3 other people, they were charged with essentially a pay-to-play scheme, like you said, which means that folks were paying them in order to have access to municipality decision-making in those cities, and they're actually criminally charged with that.
Right, which is absolutely shocking. These are people, these are elected officials. They're supposed to uphold law and order, not desecrate it like they're doing. And as our next one, number 3 here, Congressman, this is at the federal level, by the way, not even in the state. Congressman Robert Brady, he's a Democrat. He's under FBI investigation right now. No one's heard of that. What's he under investigation for?
This one's kind of funny. So he's under investigation for paying $90 grand to his Democratic primary opponent in order to get that person to drop out so that he could run unopposed. This is back in 2012, and so he's now under investigation by the FBI for that illegal transaction.
Right, because it's essentially buying his seat. But you're right, it's almost comical that he was too afraid to run against another Democrat. He didn't have enough confidence that he would win. He had to pay someone off to drop out of the race. All right, let's move to Seattle. This is the mayor of Seattle. Again, a Democrat, a sitting mayor. He was running actually for a second term in May, but he dropped out. Why did he drop out?
Well, he dropped out because a 4th man came forward with allegations of sexual abuse. There are 4 guys now alleging that back in the 1980s, he paid them when they were then underage for sexual acts. And so one of them is actually suing, but there are actually 4 men who have come forward to accuse the mayor of that. And he's decided he's not going to run. He says he's going to clear his name. But the fact that he was running before and now decided to step down, I think it adds some to the speculation that these 4 men might be telling the truth.
Right, it gives the appearance of something wrong. I mean, if he thought he was completely innocent, I don't think that he'd drop out. I'll let our system of justice decide that for certain, but not to make this always a mirror image, but can you imagine if some of these stories, if the stars of these stories had been Republicans, if these were Republican elected officials, do you think that these are stories that none of us would have heard before today?
Absolutely not, right? The media loves a corruption story with a Republican involved, and you can just go back. I mean, it's not just the Trump-Russia scandal that they haven't found a whole lot of proof for, but I mean, just across the board, anytime a Republican does anything wrong, it gets splashed across the entire media, whereas these stories, some of them much more serious, and others of them that involve, siphoning money from kids' scholarships and other things that are heinous. they really get swept under the rug and they get a minimal amount of coverage.
Right, and I think we can point to that. I mean, another example of that is the DNC. They're involved right now in defending themselves against a class action lawsuit for rigging the primary against Bernie Sanders for Hillary Clinton. We all remember that story because that was fairly widely covered, but the lawsuit against the DNC is not being widely covered. Neither is the lawsuit that alleges, this is by former employees of the DNC, by the way, that alleges that they were not paid their proper wages. I mean, this is, Inez, this is the party, the Democratic Party, that, you know, stands for Fight for 15 and minimum wage, and they're not even paying their own employees.
Right. So that lawsuit involves campaign workers, sort of low and staffing campaign workers who are alleging that they were not paid the overtime bonuses that they were owed. This is at the same time that the DNC was paying out million-dollar bonuses to its own top officials. So it's not a matter of money. And you're right. It's very hypocritical of them now that they claim to be the party for the working man, the Fight for 15, but they're not properly paying overtime to their own employees. While Sanders, by the way, is under fire for not paying his own, quote, living wage to his interns. So I think there's sort of hypocrisy on both sides of the Democratic Party split on this issue.
Right. There's some poetic justice to that, to Senator Sanders not paying his interns a living wage when he is pretty much the forefront. He's the vanguard for the minimum wage movement in our nation right now. Not to take joy in someone else not getting paid what they might deserve to be paid, I guess, but there is some poetic justice. And as we have a couple more here. So the Democratic Party chairperson, they recently had that election after the general election. It's just an inter-party vote. It's not part of our voting system here. But there's an allegation that there were 300 votes that were cast for the Democratic chairperson that were actually fraudulent, whereas the election itself was decided by a margin of 60 votes.
Right. So there's some folks who are challenging 300 votes in that election, which, as you said, was decided by a narrower margin. So this could definitely tip that election. And there is likely going to be a lawsuit filed about that as well. So we'll find out more about that in the coming months. That is, if the media decides to actually cover it.
Right, and I don't count on the fact that any mainstream outlets will cover that, or else they already would. I mean, if you compare it to the Trump-Russia coverage again, and I hate to do this, but at the same time, it's only fair to do this, the mainstream outlets have covered each issue, each allegation as if it's a conviction before the investigation has even gone forward. Yet when there's actually a criminal investigation into a Democrat, they don't even cover it until it's actually a conviction or been cleared. It's a total double standard, and that's the part that bothers me. And as one more story before we run out of time, and that's here in California, Governor Jerry Brown, a staunch Democrat, very, very liberal. He is facing allegations he actually was convicted of, and his campaign had to pay a fine for money laundering through his campaign.
Yeah, and so it was a really small fine. And so part of the scandal here is that they basically gave him a slap on the wrist, right? It was a $3,500 fine and a letter that sort of wagged the finger at him for mishandling over $1 million. So 2 six-figure contributions that added up into over $1 million. And he, quote unquote, mishandled that. But the punishment does not seem to fit the crime in that regard. It seems like they're going easy on him.
No, certainly not. I mean, there's some cases where it happened in reverse, and I believe Republicans actually served jail time for similar offenses.